Everyone says cutting people off is toxic, that it's avoidance, immaturity, emotional weakness. And maybe you believed that for a while. Maybe you sat with that uncomfortable feeling, that quiet voice in the back of your mind, asking whether you were getting it all wrong, whether there was something broken in you, whether the people who slowly disappear, who stop answering, who let relationships die without explanation, were simply the ones who never learned how to love. But what if that story is wrong? What if the people who walk away from everyone aren't running from connection, but from something far more dangerous than loneliness? Because not everyone isolates out of fear. Some people isolate because they learned, through years of experience, through disappointments that stacked quietly on top of each other, through boundaries that were crossed so many times they stopped feeling like boundaries at all, that closeness comes with a price. A real price. A silent one. Paid in small pieces every single day. And the real question was never why they left. The real question is why staying had started to feel so unsafe. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to disappear. It didn't happen like that. It was slow, quiet, almost invisible, even to you. A message you didn't reply to. A call you let ring out. A friendship you stopped feeding, not out of anger, but because somewhere along the way, you just ran out of something. Energy, hope, the willingness to try again. And then, one day, you looked around and realized you'd created distance from almost everyone. Not because you hated them, not because something dramatic happened, but because of something much quieter than that. Something most people never talk about. Relief. And that feeling confused you, didn't it? Because how is it possible to feel lighter by losing people? How can pulling away feel like freedom? That's exactly where the real story begins. Not in the behavior itself, but in understanding where it actually comes from. Psychologically speaking, cutting people off isn't random. It's a response. A pattern the mind builds, slowly, carefully, almost without your permission, usually in response to one of three things: chronic emotional exhaustion, repeated violations of personal boundaries, or relational trauma that was never fully processed. And I want to be clear about that last one, because when most people hear the word trauma, they picture something obvious, something dramatic, something the world would agree is serious. But that's not always what this is. Sometimes it's the small things, the dismissals that happened so often they became normal, the moments when you needed something and the room stayed silent, the times you expressed how you felt and were told you were overreacting. Those things leave marks too. And the brain, your brain, is always paying attention. It learns through repetition. It connects experiences to sensations. So if connection, again and again, in one form or another, kept leading to stress, to conflict, to the exhausting feeling of never quite being enough, your nervous system started doing something very specific. It started treating people as a source of threat, not because you decided to, not because you're broken, but because your biology was trying to keep you safe. That tightness you feel before a social situation, that inexplicable exhaustion after spending time with people, that relief when plans get canceled, that's not you being antisocial. That's a system that learned to protect itself in the only way it knew how. And here's the part most people skip over, because it's uncomfortable and it reaches further back than most of us want to look. This pattern didn't start in adulthood. It started much earlier, in environments where closeness didn't come with safety attached to it. Maybe there was unpredictability around you when you were growing up, people whose moods shifted without warning, homes where the atmosphere could change in an instant, and your job, without anyone ever telling you it was your job, was to sense it coming, to manage it, to stay small enough that it wouldn't turn toward you. Or maybe it wasn't chaos. Maybe it was quieter than that. Maybe it was just the consistent experience of expressing how you felt and being met with nothing. Or worse, being told that what you felt wasn't real, that you were too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. And so you adapted. You got good at reading rooms, at adjusting yourself, at figuring out what version of you was most likely to keep things calm. And somewhere in that process, without anyone saying it out loud, you learned a lesson that has followed you ever since. That connection requires you to disappear a little. That to stay close to someone, you have to be willing to give up parts of yourself, your needs, your limits, your truth. So you stopped explaining yourself. You stopped negotiating. You stopped asking for what you needed, not because you stopped needing it, but because you already knew how the story would end. And you were tired of reading the same chapter over and over again. This is where almost everyone gets it wrong about you. They see the distance and they call it a wall. They see you pulling back and they call it avoidance. They say you've closed yourself off, that you don't let people in, that you push everyone away. But they're missing something important. There is a real, significant difference between walls and boundaries, and it matters. Walls are reactive. They go up fast. They don't discriminate. They block everything, the harmful and the harmless alike. Boundaries are different. Boundaries are intentional. They don't shut everyone out. They create a filter. They let in what's genuine and keep out what's destructive. The problem, and this is the part nobody talks about, is what happens when boundaries are consistently ignored. When they're minimized, dismissed, crossed without consequence over and over again. They don't stay soft. They harden. Not because you failed, not because something is wrong with you, but because a boundary that no one respects eventually has to become something stronger. So, what looks like a wall from the outside is often just what a boundary looks like after years of being invisible. People will say you've changed, and maybe they're right, but not in the way they mean it. They're comparing who you are now to a version of you that gave too much, that stayed too long, that kept showing up for people who treated your presence like something they were entitled to. They don't see the moment everything shifted, that quiet, private realization that being endlessly available to everyone else had made you completely unavailable to yourself. And once you see that, you really can't unsee it. It changes the way you make decisions. It changes who you let close and who you keep at a distance. It changes what you're willing to accept. And to the people who benefited from the old version of you, the one who never said no, the one who absorbed everything, the one who kept giving even when empty, that change looks like coldness. It looks like distance. It looks like a problem. But what it actually is a person finally learning to take themselves seriously. Now, I have to be honest with you here, because it would be easy to make this into a simple story. You were hurt. You protected yourself. End of chapter. But the truth is more complicated than that, because isolation protects and isolation limits. And those two things can happen at the same time. Not every person who wants to be close to you carries the same energy as the ones who hurt you. Not every relationship will cost what the old ones did. And when your system has been running in defense mode for long enough, even something genuinely safe can feel threatening. Even warmth can feel like a setup. Even someone's consistency can feel suspicious. And that's the quietest cost of all of this. Not just the connections you consciously chose to leave, but the ones your nervous system quietly kept at a distance before you even realized what was happening. The real work, then, the hard part, the part that nobody puts in a caption, is learning to tell the difference between a pattern that's protecting you from real harm and a pattern that's protecting you from something that no longer exists. You are not someone who cuts people off. That framing has never been fair to you. You are someone who adapted to environments that required it. Someone who built a system of responses based on what was actually happening around you. Someone who made the only decisions that made sense at the time, with the information and the resources you had. And now you're somewhere different. You're not in reaction mode anymore. You're in awareness. And that changes what's possible. The goal isn't to go back. It isn't to reopen every door you closed or apologize for every distance you created. The goal is to move forward with more intention than you had before. To choose relationships not out of habit or guilt or the fear of being alone, but because they genuinely make space for who you actually are, with standards that protect you without sealing you off from everything. So no, walking away doesn't mean you're afraid of life. Sometimes it means you finally understood something about it that most people spend years refusing to look at. It means you recognized the patterns. It means you stopped pretending that certain things were okay when they weren't. It means you chose yourself, maybe for the first time. But real growth doesn't stop at leaving. Real growth is arriving at the place where you no longer need to run, where you can stand in your own space, solid and calm, and still choose to let someone in. Not because you have to, not because you're afraid of what happens if you don't, but because you want to. Because you've done enough work on yourself to know the difference between someone who deserves that access and someone who will simply take it. That ability, that discernment, doesn't come quickly. It doesn't arrive after one realization. It builds slowly, with every boundary you actually hold, with every time you choose peace, not out of fear, but because you know what it's worth. And that is not weakness. That is the quietest, most underrated form of strength there is.